You know what readers hate more than anything? A bad ending. You can write an amazing story with incredible characters and mind-bending plot twists, and yet, if you mess up the ending, your readers will close the book and never read anything you do ever again. But nail the ending, and they'll buy every other book you've written and tell their friends about you. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the one decision you have to make to create a satisfying ending that keeps the readers coming back for more. My name is Tim Grahl. I'm the author of 6 books. My most recent is The Shithead, which has garnered praise from top Wall Street Journal and New York Times bestselling authors. I'm also the CEO of StoryGrid, and my partner, Sean Coyne, is the creator and founder of StoryGrid, and everything I teach in this video and everything we do at StoryGrid is based on his 30 years of experience as a writer, editor, and story researcher. Now, because we're talking about the end of your story, there's a couple things that come first that we've got to discuss before we get to that one decision you have to make about the ending of your story. And those two things are your theme and the 5 commandments of storytelling. Now, I go deep into these in some other videos here on this channel. I put links to those down in the description, but I'm just going to do a quick overview now. The first is the theme, and this is the lesson that you want your reader to take away from your book. You want the reader to move from thinking or believing one thing at the beginning of your book to thinking and believing something else at the end of the book. This can be about themselves, the world, themselves in the world. This is the lesson you're trying to give them embedded in your story. And every great story, and yes, I mean every great story, has a deep and abiding and universal theme embedded in the story. This is what holds the entire story together. It's the whole reason the story exists, is to give this lesson to the reader. And the structure of your theme is you want to move them from believing X at the beginning of the story to believing Y at the end of the story. You want to change the way that they view the world in this very fundamental way, and that is your theme. The second thing we have to talk about is the 5 commandments of storytelling. This is how we track change in a story, and this is how we track that X to Y theme change in the protagonist in your story. The 5 commandments. The first is the inciting incident. This is the ball of chaos that comes into your protagonist's life at the beginning of the story and knocks their life off balance. This can be a good thing, like a job offer or meeting the potential love of their life, or it could be a bad thing, like a cancer diagnosis or a threat of violence. After the inciting incident, our protagonist starts trying things to get their life back to the way it was, to bring balance and order back to their life, and they start failing. These are progressive complications, and they lead to the turning point. And the turning point of your story is when your protagonist realizes they can't go back to the way things are. They have to move forward, and they're going to face the crisis. And the crisis is the big question. What is your protagonist going to do? Are they going to do A, or are they going to do B? And there is a crisis question in every story that has really high and important stakes to the protagonist. And the result of that crisis is the climax. This is when your protagonist acts on the decision that they make in the crisis. So whichever decision that they decide to go with, they act on that, and that's the climax. And the resolution is the 5th commandment, and this is what happens as a result of your protagonist acting on their choice. What happens with the other characters in the world. So those are the 5 commandments of storytelling that tracks the change of our protagonist, from inciting incident to turning point to crisis, climax, and resolution. And in this video, we're focusing very hard on that climax, because this is where we're going to have to decide how our story is going to end. So one way you can think about this is that at the beginning of the story, the protagonist's life is knocked off balance by the inciting incident, and the climax is the ultimate action they choose to take to fix what happened in the inciting incident. So we're looking at that climax when our protagonist makes the biggest, most important choice, and they act on that choice. So now let's talk about the ending of your story. We want to give that lesson to our reader. And when we're trying to learn a lesson, there's basically 2 ways that we can learn it. We can learn it by watching somebody fail and we realize like, oh, that's the bad way to do it. Or we can watch somebody succeed and we want to emulate them. That's the way to get what I actually want. So in real life, this is how we learn. We watch other people. We see, do they fail in that situation, or do they succeed in that situation? So just like in real life, this is the decision your protagonist makes at the climax. They can make the wrong decision or the right decision. So let's look at the right decision first. A prescriptive tale is when your protagonist makes the right decision at the climax. Now, this is right according to you and your theme in the way that you see the world and the message you're trying to give to your reader. And so what you're saying is, at the climax, my protagonist is going to make the right choice. Another way to think about this is, at the climax, your protagonist makes the heroic choice. They decide to change. Instead of falling back to the old ways of doing things, they change and they become something greater, and they act on this new way of seeing the world and this new way of making a decision. They make the heroic choice. And what you, the author, are saying when you decide to go with a prescriptive tale is, you're telling your reader, if you make this kind of heroic choice in your life, good things will happen. Now, there are obviously bittersweet endings, and these are most stories where at the end the protagonist loses something, but they get something. And in a prescriptive tale, they might lose something, but they get something even greater. They get something more important to them. Now, prescriptive endings make up most of our movies and books and stories, and there's a couple reasons for this. First of all, it's just more enjoyable for the reader. It's more enjoyable for the consumer because at the end they have a joyful catharsis. They get to see somebody succeed at becoming something greater than themselves. They are also more commercially viable. They're more likely to find a bigger audience and sell more copies. So most stories are prescriptive. We see the protagonist make the right choice at the climax, and we see the good things that happened as a result. So whether it's Pride and Prejudice, where Elizabeth Bennet decides to give up both her pride and prejudice in order to find true love, or in Crazy Rich Asians, when Rachel Chu decides to keep her individuality and not sacrifice herself for Nick Young's family, and as a result, she gets to keep who she is and get the love of her life. Or Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when Harry makes the heroic choice to confront Professor Quirrell/Voldemort and ends up defeating him and is safe. The list is really endless here. Any book or movie that you're thinking of, if the ending was happy, it's a prescriptive tale. And on the other side of that, a cautionary tale is when the protagonist makes the wrong choice at the climax of your story. Again, wrong according to your theme and the way that you see the world. And so another way to think about this is, they make the unheroic choice. They choose not to change. They choose not to move forward, and they double down on the old ways of doing things and the things that have broken their life in the past. And so you, the author, are saying to your reader, if you make these kind of choices, bad things will happen, because that is what we see in the resolution of the story, is that bad things happen. And so a cautionary tale is telling the reader, if you make these kind of choices, bad things are going to happen. Now, these are a smaller subset of books and movies because they don't have that joyful catharsis at the end. They're often sad and disturbing, and they tend to not be as commercially viable as prescriptive tales, although that's not always the case. There are lots of very popular, very successful cautionary tales. Here's a few just to think about. Whether it's Gone Girl, where Nick Dunn decides to stay with his wife Amy, even though he knows what an awful person she is. Or in Up in the Air, when Ryan Bingham, after he is rejected by Alex Gorin, instead of continuing to seek out true connection, goes back to his old way of living disconnected from everyone. Or in the movie Parasite, where literally every character makes the unheroic choice, and when they have the chance to do something good, they don't take it, and all kinds of bad things happen. So when you're planning out your story, you have to know if you're ultimately telling a prescriptive or a cautionary tale. How do you want to pass the lesson embedded in your theme to the reader? Are you going to show them what happens when you make the heroic, the good choice? Or are you going to show them the results of what happens when you make the wrong or unheroic choice? And you have to embed these into the macro 5 commandments of storytelling in your story. You have to know from the beginning that's where you're going. You're going to have the protagonist make the wrong or right choice at the climax, because this will impact the entire story. The biggest thing you do not want to do is make it ambiguous. When you get to the end of the story, I'm sure you've read a book like this where you get to the end and it's kind of unclear what the author was trying to do. Were they making a prescriptive tale or a cautionary tale? And these are those books where you're reading and you get to the end and it kind of feels like the author wasn't really sure how to end the book, so they just kind of stop telling the story, and they drive us all crazy. And so from the beginning, you have to know, what kind of story are you telling? How are you going to end your story? Are you going to end it as a prescriptive or cautionary tale? Now, of course, to get a reader all the way to the end of your book, you have to know how to write great scenes. You have to be a great scene writer, because even if you have a great ending plan for your book, if you can't keep the reader turning pages all the way to the end and they get bored or confused and stop reading, they never actually get there, which means they never finish your book and they never tell somebody else about it. So if you want to get better at your line by line and scene writing, I highly recommend you join us for the upcoming scene writing workshop. You can go to storygrid.com/workshop to find out more information about this, but this is the class where we guarantee you will become a much better writer in 6 weeks. You'll make more progress in your writing in 6 weeks with us than 6 years on your own. So if you want to see more about this, go to storygrid.com/workshop. If you want to dig deeper into this idea of theme, I highly recommend clicking the video that is on your screen now. And I've got several videos down in the description as well that will keep you learning and understanding how to tell a great story. But either way, thanks for being a writer. Thanks for being a part of our community here at StoryGrid, and I'll see you next time.